So far, we have discussed about the concept of constructive alignment. We have also discussed about the learning outcomes mapping. And also we have looked into how we can use different teaching and learning strategy to map with the different learning domain. So the last part that we're going to see is what are the assessment strategy to assess the different learning domain that exist in our course learning outcome. In this video, I'll be sharing with you the different suggested assessment method for different learning outcomes. So hopefully by the end of this video, you'll be able to explain the different assessment strategy for different learning outcomes. So we know from the earlier on videos, we know that the challenges that lecturers are encountering right now include having difficulty to identify the right assessment and teaching strategy to deliver the outcomes. So in the previous video, we have identified what are the teaching and delivery strategy that you can use for different learning outcomes. So in this video, we're going to cover the other part of the challenge, which is identifying what are the assessment method that you can use to address the different learning outcomes needs. So also we know that there are 4 mappings of CLO over here. So this video will be covering the last part of the mapping of CLO, which is mapping your CLO to your assessment method. We can see that in your COPA documents table 4, so you are not only need to do the mapping between the CLO and the PLO, also the mapping between the CLO and the teaching method, and also your CLO to your assessment method. So basically this table itself indicating the constructive alignments that we have mentioning so far, how your CLO is mapped against the teaching method and assessment method based on the learning domain, the learning domain that you have used for your CLO. So we have to identify the right assessment method for each of your CLO mentions over here. So we know that to identify which level of assessment method that we should use is highly depending on the learning domain that we have used for the particular CLO. So it's either you use in a cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. It will have different impact on your assessment method design. So let's look at the example that we used earlier on, the principle of management, the year 1 subject. So we have identified that there are 3 CLO over here, and each of the CLO we have identified the right learning domain and also the mapping to the PLO. So right now we need to identify the assessment method for each of these course learning outcomes over here. Also, we have gone through this cognitive domain in the previous video, where we know that there are 6 levels of in the cognitive domain from C1 until C6, with each of these explanation. Like for example, remember is targeting on recalling the facts, understand is trying to explain the ideas or concept, apply is whether the student is able to use the information in a new situation, analyze is whether the student is able to draw connection amongst the idea, and also whether evaluate whether students is able to justify a stand or decision, and finally create whether students is able to produce new or original work over here. So how and what are the assessment method that we can use over here? So you can see it over here is that there are a few suggested assessment method for you over here. Like for example, if you want the students to do remember C1, then you can ask them to do an essay question as assessment method, whether the student is able to answer the essay question or not, or whether the student is able to answer your short answer questions. It could be as simple as during in the class you can call up them for a spot quiz, ask the students to answer the quiz accordingly, whether they remember the concept that you have shared with them earlier on. You can go up to the most difficult one, which is create, where you can ask the students to conduct actually a critical review, a long case study, or a project on a particular topic. So where you will require the students to actually create a new idea or new understanding from the case study that they have studied about, come up with a new strategy, or propose a new solutions to the existing problems. So this could be one of the way you could test at a different level using a different technique. So cognitive level is relatively easier as long as you understand the level that you have seen over here. As long as you have understand the level over here. Okay. As long as you understand that if your C1 is to measure recall facts, you may just ask the students to come up with a spot quiz. or if you want to test as apply or analyze level, use information in a new situation, then you may ask the students to solve a particular problems or demonstrate or operate a particular set of procedure. So just bear in mind that when you are setting your exam question, because in cognitive level, cognitive domain, a lot of time we'll be using exam, final exam, essay question, project, yeah, to as our assessment method. So you must make sure that the exam questions that you have set, you also use the right action verbs. So make sure that you use the right action verb in your exam question that align with the level of cognitive domain that you want to test. Like for example, in our example just now, the first one discussed, we're going to start test as C2. So C2 is understand, yeah? So you may ask the students to classify, describe, or translate, or select. These are the keywords that you should use in your essay question, yeah? Because if you know that C2, you can use essay question to assess them. So make sure in your essay question, you also use the right keyword, action verb itself. Yeah, you must make sure that this is also well aligned. A lot of time, lecturers forget about this. So they have done the CLO, they use the correct action verbs, but when it comes to exam papers, that time they use the wrong action verbs. Yeah, so resulting most of the time the things are not well aligned. Means that you want to test a C2, eventually a question asked at a higher level or lower level. So even if like you are wetting your colleague's paper that time, this is the part that you have to look into it as well. The action verb you use in the exam question, whether it's aligned with the Bloom taxonomy that the question want to measure. Yeah, so make sure it is well aligned. So it's very important for you to understand your exam paper or your assessment, final exam, is going to achieve which CRO and at which level, and then you should set accordingly. Okay, so this is one of the tips that I want to share with you all, and I hope that you all can remember. Affective domain remain the most difficult to be evaluated as well over here, yeah, affective domain. So affective domain, we know that it has a 5 level from A1 until A5, receiving, responding, valuing, organizing, and characterization. Okay, so most importantly, you should understand in each of the domain level over here, what is the meaning. Okay, then you'll be able to set it accordingly. So for effective domain assessment, this is something that you need to take note about, yeah, because it's a little bit different from the cognitive one. So basically, for any of the effective assessment system, there are two main primary purpose over here. It's either you want to verify the competency in the effective domain, which means that you want to measure the competency level of your students, whether they are at the A1 level or they already reached the A5 level, or you want to use the assessment system as a method to change their particular behavior. Okay, so these are two primary purpose if you want to design an effective assessment system. I think most of the time for academic wise, we will try to tackle the first purpose to verify the student's competency in the effective domain area. So you can see that for effective domain, basically they don't have like in each category which specific methods that you can use. If you compare the cognitive, they are very different. Yeah, in cognitive, like under the remember, you can use fill in the blank, for example. But in the create, you have to use long case questions or project. However, for effective domain, most of the assessment method can be used across all the category. So why I say so? Like for example, we take the example case presentation. We can use case presentation to test or to assess all the 5 domains together. It's just depending on your descriptions of each of the domain. Like for example, if you want to use case presentation to test A1 receiving, so you'll be just describing the cases that you will be observing whether the students receive the information from the case, because receiving means that whether students are aware of the information. Then you just observe that you think whether it's achieved or not achieved. You can also use the same assessment method to test at the higher level, for example, organizing, whether students are able to modify an existing concept into new ideas. Then you use a case presentation. When a student presents at time, you will see whether students are able to present the new idea, yeah, based on existing concept. So this is again shows that affective domain, you can use one assessment method to measure at different domain level. So basically, you just need to bear in mind that when you're using affective domain that time, you just need to determine what are the primary purpose, yeah, you want to do this affective assessment method. It's either you want to verify the competency or you want to serve a method to change their behavior. So this is a main case. So my advice to use is that if you want to use affective domain, you must make sure that you are very clear, yeah? You are very clear about the definition or the description of each of the domain level from A1 until A5. Then after that, identify carefully what are the primary purpose you want to use that particular affective assessment system. It's either you want to measure their competency or you want to serve as a method to change the student's behavior. Then the last one will be psychomotor domain. Yeah, psychomotor domain. It will range from P1 until P7. So again, psychomotor domain is like what I shared with you just now, using the in the previous video, using the culinary courses as an example, where the students can start to cook. So psychomotor domain, I would say that it would be highly similar to affective domain, where you can use a simple mastery assessment test to see the student's competency scale. Yeah, like for example, in culinary, it's the best example that you can use this to explain. Yeah, so you can measure whether the students has mastered at which level, whether it's just under perception, whether the students is only able to use their sensory guide, for example, their hand to measure to feel the heat, the correct heat, or use their vision to see whether the ingredient is still fresh or not. Yeah, so this is an example, perception. Then you can see that whether the students able to combine all the perceptions that they already have and ready to cook or not. Whether they able to use their hand to feel the heat, use their vision to feel the freshness of the ingredient, and so on and so forth. And then whether they say that, okay, all the condition fit, I'm ready to cook right now. So this is meant by set. Or you can test them whether they are able to cook based on a recipe. Yeah, you give them a recipe book, ask them to cook by following the steps there. This is a guided response. Or you can take away the recipe from them, ask them to cook based on their memory, and then see their proficiency. So maybe they will take some time to cook the food without referring to the recipe, and then the food produced is still so-called edible, so it still tastes okay, acceptable. Then they have achieved the mechanism P4. In fact, the students, without referring to the cookbook, can cook confidently within a short period of time, and then the outcome is fantastic, wonderful food produced. Then they have achieved P5. Then also you can give them specific conditions to them. Same in the same test, but you can give them some ad hoc situation where suddenly you say that, okay, right now we cannot buy a particular vegetable that you need in your cook, and then the vegetable is replaced with something else. For example, the vegetable is replaced with a fruit. Yeah. So how the students can modify the existing recipe that they have known so that they can still produce a food with the same taste or a better taste with a new adaptation to the new ingredients that you have given to them. Okay, so this is called adaptation, an ad hoc situation, and you see that whether your students are able to modify their skills or not to fit with the new situations. Then at the end, you may ask them to produce a new recipe themselves, create a food fusions, or create a new type of food that you cannot find normally in any other recipe or in a cookbook. That's called origination, which is a higher level. So you can see that psychomotor domain, you can use a simple test to test at a different level. So it's depending highly on the assessor observation and determine whether the students actually have achieved, whether it's P1 or until P7 over here. Okay, so this is an example like I've shown you just now. Psychomotor and affective domain are very similar. You can use one assessment method for all the levels, but again, it's depending on which competency level you want to measure from them. Okay, so this is an example that we can use a mastery performance test to do the assessment method for different psychomotor domain. Okay, so after looking at these three domains, so I believe that you will even concrete your understanding and then agree that cognitive domain will still remain the most easiest to measure because it has a specific measurement method for each of the level of the learning domain. If you compare to affective and psychomotor, where sometimes it can be used across and highly depending on the assessor's scale to differentiate and come up with a detailed descriptions on what are the competency level that measure at each level. So this is a thing that differentiate between the three domains. Okay, so if you come back to our example over here, Principle of Management, the year 1 subject, so you will see that at the end of course, the students need to complete these 3 course learning outcome. And then we have discussed about the teaching method in the earlier videos. So right now we come with the assessment method. So if you look at the first CRO, which I want the students to discuss the role and responsibility of management in business, C2, PO1, I may use a report method. Yeah, ask students to produce a report, yeah, or a project so that they can discuss and explain their role over there. Then explain the management principle. Then I may use an assignment. Yeah, assignment. Ask the students to explain the management principle in a business organization. I may ask them to identify one of the business organization, or you can give them a business organization, existing business, like for example, you can give them AirAsia or Petronas, or yep, and then ask them to explain the management principle that they can observe within that particular company, and as an assignment. Then finally, the last one, present, the most simple one. You may ask them to present, do a presentation, yeah, and you measure the presentation, come with a presentation rubric to measure the students' presentation on the CRO3 as well. So this is how you put in accordingly the assessment method. Okay. Like for example, if the CRO3 is present, then you ask the students to do a quiz, then it's definitely not well aligned. Yeah. But if you ask them to do a quiz to C2, then it could be acceptable. So again, constructive alignment very emphasized on whether your teaching method and your assessment method are well aligned with your course learning outcome. And then your course learning outcome is guided by the learning domain. So basically, the learning domain will determine what are the appropriate teaching technique and assessment method that you should use. Of course, this is very subjective method. There's no fixed answer that for this particular learning domain, you must use a particular set of assessment method. Again, it's very depending on the assessor experience and also the understanding of the OBE concept. So it's always welcome for you to discuss with your senior colleague in the department or in the school itself to come up with a well all-rounded assessment method to covers all the learning outcome. So you can take opportunities in any of your school board or program committee meeting, something to discuss about the appropriate method. You can also discuss with your vetter, yeah, on all this opinion. You can also make use of your external assessor to give you the idea what is the current practice in the industry right now, yeah. What are the method that they use to measure a specific domain, especially the affective and the psychomotor domain, which is more not so common for us in the academic field for our context. Rather than if you're doing TVET, then you have a lot of affective and psychomotor things coming in. But if you're an ordinary institution, then I would say that cognitive will be still the one that dominating most of your learning outcome. Yeah. Okay. So I prepared one assignment for you, the assignment 3. So in this assignment 3, you have to perform a basic constructive alignment based on the learning outcome. So this is one example of the question, how it looks like. It's very simple. I will give you a lot of, not a lot, a few of the course learning outcome, for example here. By the end of the chemistry course, students will be able to list all of the elements in the periodic table. So you list out all the periodic table, natrium, sodium, magnesium, all this, right? List the periodic table. So usually you will see this in your Form 1 syllabus, where students will be remember the periodic table. So what's the action word over here? Action word is list. List is C1, remembering. So what are the teaching and learning strategy that you can use? You can use a memory activities. Yeah, you can ask the students to memorize it, and then you can, in the class, ask them to fill up the periodic table. Yeah, okay, you can play some memory game with them. Yeah, so that they can memorize the periodic table, the elements in the periodic tables. Because by anyhow your learning outcome is list, C1. C1 means remember. So you just want the students to remember only, without knowing the characteristic or the attributes of each of the elements. So you just want to know, let them know that what are the position of each elements in the periodic tables only. So memory activities could be one of the good way of teaching and learning strategy if you compare to just purely lecture itself. Yeah, so you have some game inside, then you help them to remember better. So how to assess their learning over here? You can use exam, and then you can further specify. Yeah, exam, you what kind of question that you set? Fill in the blank. Yeah, for example, you come up with the empty table with some the periodic table with some empty spot, and then ask the students to fill in the spot accordingly, so that they were able to list all the elements in the periodic table accordingly. Okay, so this is how the teaching and learning strategy and the assessment strategy could be well aligned with the course learning outcome based on a learning domain. Yeah. So not to be so rigid and fixed to any method that's available on the internet or on any training or what I've told you. But in fact, you can use your own experience and understanding on the topic and come up with something, yeah, that can really help the students. Because teaching and learning and assessment is not something fixed for forever. It keeps on evolving, yeah. So people will come up with an even better learning, teaching and learning strategy and assessment strategy for the students. So our main objective is for the sake of students, so that they can acquire the skill that we want them to acquire in a particular course. So not to limit yourself with a very fixate of kind of mindset that I must use this technique to do this delivery. But in fact, you can come on, keep on innovate, yeah, innovate a teaching technique so that students can learn effectively and you can teach happily. Okay, so basically that's the end for my session with you. So I really appreciate your time spending with me for all the modules that you have gone through, from writing learning outcomes until the constructive alignment part. So after my session, you will go into Dr. Sean's session where he will be talking to you about self-learning time and the credit system and all these things. So I hope that you will benefited from my session. If you have any question, you're welcome to see me. Then we can always discuss about it. I can give you share with my experience, and hopefully we can come out something better for our students. Thank you for watching.